showers around southern and western coasts. Let's take a look at the details. Starting off in the southwest, and here there will be bright or sunny spells, but also a scattering of showers which will become more widespread throughout the day. In the southeast, any showers will be largely confined to the coast, so it will be largely dry with fog thinning out to brighter spells. Plenty of showers around western parts of Wales, and these may feed further inland, but eastern parts will remain still drier throughout the day. A mostly dry picture for the Midlands, with just 1 or 2 passing showers possible, and any fog thinning out to bright or sunny spells. Temperatures near average for the time of year. A similar picture for the northeast. Here it should be mostly dry with early mist and fog thinning and lifting. Some sunny breaks are possible this afternoon and highs of around 8 Celsius. Around Scotland we can expect a few showers through the morning into the afternoon. These most likely through the coast, though inland and eastern parts should be drier with some sunshine. A mostly fine picture across most of Northern Ireland too. Here there should be some sunny skies and 1 or 2 coastal showers. Temperatures rising to around 9 Celsius. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards and public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narendra.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
We believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky. That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg. And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Protests in China and rebellions at home. Whilst the Prime Minister is to give his first major foreign policy speech this evening, is it actually his domestic agenda that is causing the most trouble? 3 separate rebellions by Conservative backbenchers are all gathering pace this week. How will the Prime Minister manage? And is the Conservative Party manageable at all? We'll explore these questions after the headlines.
A very good morning, 9:31. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. In China, authorities have put up barriers around parts of Shanghai after hundreds of people protested against strict COVID restrictions. 10 people were killed in a tower block fire over the weekend, sparking civil unrest in the capital Beijing, Shanghai and Wuhan. Demonstrators claim that coronavirus measures may have hindered their escape from a fire. They're calling for President Xi Jinping to resign. There's huge police presence in some major cities. Many people have been detained. That number, though, is still unknown. Armed forces could stand in for hospital staff as part of emergency plans to deal with possible strikes over the winter. Health officials are drawing up contingencies to cover frontline workers as ambulance drivers and paramedics consider joining nurses in their upcoming walkouts. The government says it's working on a range of options with the NHS to manage disruption during industrial action. The government's launching a £1 billion scheme to make middle-income homes more energy efficient. Hundreds of thousands of homes could receive loft and cavity wall insulation for 3 years from spring. It's mostly being targeted at households that don't currently get support to upgrade their homes, with a fifth of the funding being targeted at the most vulnerable. Matt Hancock has finished third on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, with the retired England footballer Jill Scott being crowned Queen of the Jungle. The former Health Secretary was one of 3 finalists, which also included the Hollyoaks actor Owen Warner. Now, speaking with the presenters, Anton Deck, the West Suffolk MP, recognised appearing on the show was controversial. He spent 18 days in the Australian jungle and lost the Conservative Party whip. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. It's GB News. Now let's head back to the briefing with Tom.
Good morning, it's 9:33 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, it's another week of difficulty for the Prime Minister. Whilst this evening Rishi Sunak will set out his foreign policy agenda, a doctrine of what he's describing as robust pragmatism at the Lord Mayor's banquet, it's his struggles at home, perhaps, that will likely be at the forefront of his mind. Not 1, not 2, but 3 rebellions brewing on his own backbenches. 2 on the planning bill, the NIMBYs, led by Theresa Villiers, wanting to end presumption for sustainable development, and the YIMBYs, led by Simon Clarke, seeking to end Rishi Sunak's ban on onshore wind farms. And this morning, a 3rd rebellion on asylum seekers, being led by the former Brexit Secretary David Davis. He, along with 50 colleagues, is demanding that economic migrants travelling from safe countries such as Albania are returned far more quickly. Well, what an in-tray for the Prime Minister this week. Let's talk it all over with John Rentoul, chief political commentator at The Independent. And John, the Prime Minister probably wants us to be talking about foreign affairs today, but it is the domestic troubles that he really must be focusing on, I would imagine. This latest letter being written by David Davis does seem to pose a significant challenge on a very hot button issue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think after the cost of living and the NHS, I think the question of small boats coming across the channel is possibly the most important that Rishi Sunak's facing. But what's significant about all 3 rebellions that you've just listed, you've got onshore wind, you've got the relaxation of planning rules to allow more house building, and you've got David Davis on sending back asylum seekers. The common theme in all of them is that absolutely nothing can happen, and the government is completely powerless. And what's significant, really, is the suggestion that the discipline in the Conservative Party, parliamentary Conservative Party, is breaking down.
It's interesting to see how these sort of spiralled. First, Theresa Villiers laid down a number of amendments to this planning bill, and almost in response, Simon Clarke, who's been on the more pro-house building end of the Conservative Party, almost in response to that, he laid a sort of countervailing amendment, not on house building, but of course on onshore wind, and managed to attract the support of Boris Johnson, of Liz Truss, of a number of big beasts. Is it just open season now for Conservative backbenchers to defy the government?
Well, I mean, not quite. I mean, neither of those issues, house building or onshore wind, is particularly important because, it's just not possible to build a significantly larger number of houses, it's not possible to build wind turbines in many more places in the UK because of local opposition, and everybody accepts that there has to be some kind of local consent for these things. So the argument really comes down to, and this is something that Michael Gove is negotiating with the rebels. The argument really comes down to how you measure local consent, and the same really goes for house building. I mean, how do you overcome local opposition without putting Conservative seats in danger? The asylum seekers issue is slightly different, I accept.
And the asylum seekers issue, let's dive into that. We have explored the housing issue in quite some detail over the last week in the show. I'm sure viewers are probably sick to death with me talking about housing. But when it comes to asylum seekers, this is a really interesting letter being written by the former Brexit secretary, saying that if someone comes from a safe country, such as Albania, and has almost sort of complained of being people trafficked, said that they've been brought to the United Kingdom against their will. David Davis is saying that the presumption should therefore be, if they say they have come here against their will, surely the humane thing then is to take them back to the country they came from, assuming it's safe. That sounds eminently reasonable.
It does. I mean, there is clearly a problem with the modern slavery law, which is fairly recent. It was only brought in by Theresa May, but it's just not as simple to send people back to where they came from if we know where they came from. I mean, a lot of the problem with, I'm not talking about Albania, but a lot of the problem with asylum seekers in previous waves was that we weren't sure where they came from, and if they said they came from Syria and places like that, it wasn't possible to send them back. And that will remain the case. And I think it'll be very difficult in practice to send people back to Albania. I don't think passing a law or amending a law in Parliament is really going to make much of a difference to that.
It's interesting, though, that we sort of have this system whereby people, whether they're trafficked, whether they pay criminal gangs a lot of money, come across the channel, and they're coached in terms of what to say to lawyers when they get to the United Kingdom, and they're told that they have to say, oh yes, no, I was trafficked, I was this, I was that, and by that way they can sort of navigate the system and avoid deportation. I suppose there is room there for reform to look at the ways, look at the scripts that these people are given by the criminal gangs and tighten it up. What do you suspect is the likelihood that the Home Office will actually look seriously at this letter and take on some of their suggestions?
Well, I mean, they can look at it, but I mean, it is all much harder than David Davis suggests, and David Davis really ought to know better as a former cabinet minister. I mean, you could talk about asylum seekers being coached and all that, but they're often advised by lawyers as to what their rights are, and they do have rights. And if they have been persecuted or are persecuted abroad, then we have an obligation to give them asylum. And unless you change the Refugee Convention and the European Convention on Human Rights, you're not going to be able to do much about that.
Of course, Sweden has done something very similar to what David Davis is proposing, specifically when it comes to Albania, designating it as a safe country and saying no more Albanians will be accepted. Although I suppose Sweden did accept a large number of Albanians in recent decades, so maybe slightly different dynamics there. But I suppose the Prime Minister this evening we'll be talking about foreign policy in the round. He may well be referencing the two great despotic challenges of our time, Russia and China. He's talking about a new doctrine of pragmatism when it comes to foreign affairs. Just, John Rentoul, if you are indeed still there, and we may well struggle to get him back up, but no, it sounds like John is indeed still here. In which case, just finally, John Rentoul, what is this new doctrine from the Prime Minister when it comes to foreign affairs?
What was it called? Robust pragmatism. Yeah, no, it sounds like a load of rubbish to me. I'm sorry. It sounds like a device to get a prime minister through a foreign policy speech. And as you say, dealing with China involves all sorts of compromises, moral and otherwise, and is not something that is going to save Rishi Sunak from a divided party. And public opinion in this country, which seems to have turned against the Conservative Party rather decisively.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what the Prime Minister says this evening at the Lord Mayor's banquet. But for now, John Rentoul, thank you very much for joining us and talking through the very, very difficult week that our Prime Minister has ahead of him. Thanks for joining us. Well, we've teed that up all nicely because we're sticking with China, where these weekend-long anti-government protests have continued. Initially simply demonstrations against strict COVID restrictions, they've grown to take on a greater significance. Demonstrators claim extreme zero COVID measures played a part in the deaths of 10 people who were killed in a tower block fire. Now, they claim they couldn't escape due to these restrictions. But the protests spread, revealing general discontent with the restrictive system of government by the Chinese Communist Party, from censorship to those physical restrictions. Now, a number of people have been detained in the capital, Beijing, and in Shanghai, and as some have called for the President, Xi Jinping, to resign. Well, let's see how significant these are, these protests that have popped up across the country in the last 48 hours. Let's discuss it with Luke de Pulford, a human rights campaigner who looks particularly at the areas of modern slavery and human rights abuses in China. And Luke, are you surprised by the sort of spontaneous nature of these protests? These are remarkably rare in a system like China.
Yeah, they are very surprising and they are exceptionally significant. I think there are a couple of things to underline around it. There are lots of isolated protests in China all the time, and we don't tend to hear about them. But nothing like this. These are the most explicit anti-government protests since Tiananmen Square. It's a really big deal. You've got people directly calling for Xi Jinping to go. You've got people calling for human rights and democracy. I honestly didn't think that we would see this as a result of the COVID policies or as a result of even the really tragic and awful fire in Urumqi. So exceptionally significant and an almost kind of once-in-a-generation moment happening right now.
I wonder to what extent this is a result of economic concern. The sort of promise of Xi Jinping, the promise of China for the last 20 years to its people is that we're going to operate an incredibly repressive system. We're not going to give you human rights. You're not going to have freedom of expression, but in return we'll give you prosperity and stability. I wonder to what extent the fact that that prosperity and stability seems to be slipping away, the economy of China seems to be spluttering a little bit. In your view, has that been potentially what changes the dynamic here?
Well, I think there are a number of things to take into account. Obviously, the economic impact has been exceptionally difficult for many, many people in China. It's really hurt their businesses. It's meant that they can't go about their daily business. Their normal bustling cities, which are normally full of commerce, haven't been able to operate as usual. But there are many other things besides that. Fascinating analysis coming through around the World Cup, for example. You've got a lot of people in China who are looking at those crowds, many crowds in Qatar, who are all there together, cheek by jowl, enjoying the football. Well, China's been so worried about this being broadcast throughout the country that they're censoring crowds. They're making sure that nobody can actually see that there are people not wearing masks in the crowds in the World Cup. And that has also added to the anger. So look, there are many things all combining here. I think it's partly the lack of information that people within China have about other people's COVID policies outside of China. That's angered people a lot. It's the Urumqi fire, which was, really terrible. The reports are that they couldn't get out because the doors themselves had been barricaded by the authorities as a part of the extremely restrictive COVID measures. But yes, of course, it's the economy. People are going into their 4th year of this stuff now in China. They've had enough of it.
It's fascinating to see the breadth of these protests and indeed the focus in some universities as well. You mentioned this is perhaps the most significant wave of protests since Tiananmen Square. Of course, that brings to the forefront of everyone's minds just how might China respond to these protests? Might they be very, very brutal indeed? So far, what has been the response from the authorities?
Well, we're seeing the early signs of what we know is coming, which will be an exceptionally harsh crackdown. The People's Republic of China under the Chinese Communist Party does not brook any kind of dissent and does not like this kind of protest. You might recall that just before the 20th Party Congress, which has just happened, there was a lone protester who put a banner up campaigning against the government in Beijing. That person has disappeared, and this is the modus operandi. They don't like it, they don't tolerate it, and we're already seeing some of that crackdown. However, they're in a bind. There are so many people that have been protesting throughout the country that a huge crackdown could have negative political consequences for Xi Jinping as well. So I don't think they know how to handle it. I think the real question for us, for the democratic West, and particularly today for Rishi Sunak as he tries to tee up a foreign policy speech, is how are they going to respond to that? What's our preemptive package of sanctions, for example, going to be in the event that we see tens of thousands of people interned, which is not unlikely? We saw over the past couple of days a BBC journalist has been beaten in custody, reportedly. This is pretty bad stuff, and it's an indication of the direction of travel. So we're all deeply worried about that. I don't think that we can overstate the remarkable courage of the people speaking out. They know the fate that awaits them, but they are still calling for human rights, democracy, and an end to these preposterous policies that China is intent on pursuing.
It's really, really interesting to see this unfold. Just finally, Luke de Pulford, what would you say Rishi Sunak should be saying this evening in response?
Well, we need to hear a statement of solidarity with those protesters. It's a fundamental right to be able to peacefully protest and make your views known. We need to be hearing that. A strong statement of solidarity, not just with them, but with the victims of the fire in Urumqi, which was a truly tragic and terrible event, not just for Uyghurs, but for the others who died there too. We need to hear that. But I think perhaps more pertinently, we need to hear that the West, that the UK particularly, is not going to sit on its hands and watch tens of thousands of protesters be interned, be disappeared, be beaten in custody. We can't just watch that happen. We need to be encouraging these people. We're always told by the Chinese Communist Party that they're exceptionally popular, that there's no distinction between the party and people, that they're kind of the same thing and can be conflated. We need to drive a wedge between that argument. We need to be saying no, that the people of China have their own views and they ought to be able to articulate them. And when they have an opportunity to articulate them, what do they say? They say down with Xi Jinping. They say we want democracy. They say we want human rights. And we want an end to these policies which are preventing us from living a normal and free life.
Absolutely fascinating events unfurling, and so interesting to see those blank pieces of paper being held up by protesters as well. Something started in Hong Kong, a message about censorship, now reverberating around the whole of China. Well, Luke de Pulford, thank you so much for joining us this morning on The Briefing. Really, really important stuff going on there. Well, now, with UK households already stretched and struggling with bills, tensions are rising over the increase in migrants being housed in hotels and needing access to local services such as healthcare. The residents of Skegness, a busy tourist hub in Lincolnshire, have demanded answers from their local MP. Well, our East Midlands reporter Will Hollis sent us this from their town hall meeting.
A community at boiling point, the local MP trying to cool tensions.
They are from some of the most war-torn and troubled.
Despite sitting on Britain's edge, Skegness is at the centre of the migrant row.
I'm passionate about, you know, the residents that live here, and a lot of us aren't feeling very safe.
We don't know the backgrounds of these people, where they're from, what have they done, what are they actually running away from.
They're getting free medical treatment. We can't get a doctor in Skegness.
Not everyone is worried. One Ukrainian woman questioned why she was welcomed so warmly while these men are met with hostility. 5 hotels are being used by more than 200 asylum seekers, while the Home Office struggles with processing delays and a lack of accommodation. Skegness MP Matt Warman says the future is uncertain, but he understands people's concern.
When they say, for instance, we want to know when a hotel might stop being used, I think it's right that, as I say, I'm honest and say, look, I can't give you a date right now. What I can do is apply the maximum pressure to the Home Secretary, to the government. This is a situation that those people themselves say is not acceptable. We've got to move on from it as quickly as possible.
More than 2 million visitors descend on Skegness each year, but out of season, it's quiet and hotels are largely empty.
The Home Office says that accommodation is needed for 37,000 asylum seekers here in the UK.
Some locals say trade is already turning away from the town. Danny and Adrian are on the town council.
Without tourism, it's the major industry that we have on the coast, tourists. And if we lose the tourists, then Skegness will be in trouble.
These people that are here, unfortunately, have just come through, you know, perilous waters to get to our shores with no money. So they can't support an economy that struggles for over half the year.
The local district council, East Lindsey, declined to comment, saying it's a Home Office issue. But in cases where asylum is granted, the council could face additional pressures, according to the leader, Craig Leyland, speaking of his own accord.
We would say there's a balance between what we can do locally in terms of the numbers that we can support and how that goes forward. That's our concern, is that balance. We don't want that to tip over into, you know, community cohesion problems when that balance tips the wrong way.
In a statement, the Home Office said that the use of hotels to house asylum seekers is unacceptable and that it's a temporary solution. The UK hit its highest levels of net migration this week, despite Brexit and border promises. In Skegness, a town with the highest Leave vote in the country, referendum wishes and reality are very different things. Will Hollis for GB News in Skegness.
Well, thank you to Will for that really interesting piece there from Skegness. So fascinating to see the impact all the way around the country. But just finally today, the Foreign Secretary has been speaking this morning, talking about the scourge of sexual violence in conflict. Our political reporter, Catherine Forster, has been at the event in Westminster for us. Now, Catherine, what was the Foreign Secretary saying?
So he opened the conference saying that it was morally abhorrent, illegal and still happening around the world. Sexual violence in conflict, and that it should be treated as a red line, much in the way as the use of chemical weapons. That it shouldn't be something that people accept just happens as a sort of byproduct of war, that it is a weapon of war and must be treated as such. Now, this is the second conference that's been held of this Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict initiative. The first one was back in 2014, and this is an area in which Britain really has led the world. It was started by the then Foreign Secretary William Hague, and the Hollywood star Angelina Jolie brought a lot of star power. She's already been speaking this morning by a video link from Los Angeles. At the moment, Nadia Murad, who's the Nobel Prize winner, is speaking. She was a Yazidi woman who was held by ISIS as a sex slave. But a lot of work to do. They're hoping to announce an initiative to use tech to increase the number of convictions, which are sadly very, very low.
Countries being brought together, no mean feat for the United Kingdom. Let's see if anything comes of it today. Of course, these conferences sometimes are more talk than action, but we'll follow that one throughout the day. Catherine Foster, thank you very much for joining us on the briefing this morning. That's it for the show today. Catch me again 9:30 tomorrow, but next up, it's Bev Turner with Bev Turner Today.
Looking ahead to today's weather, and the UK is looking foggy to start for some, with some showers around southern and western coasts. Let's take a look at the details. Starting off in the southwest, and here there will be bright or sunny spells, but also a scattering of showers which will become more widespread throughout the day. In the southeast, any showers will be largely confined to the coast, so it will be largely dry, with fog thinning out to brighter spells. Plenty of showers around western parts of Wales, and these may feed further inland, but eastern parts will remain still drier throughout the day. A mostly dry picture for the Midlands, with just 1 or 2 passing showers possible, and any fog thinning out to bright or sunny spells. Temperatures near average for the time of year. A similar picture for the northeast. Here it should be mostly dry with early mist and fog thinning and lifting. Some sunny breaks are possible this afternoon and highs of around 8 Celsius. Around Scotland we can expect a few showers through the morning into the afternoon. These most likely through the coast, though inland and eastern parts should be drier with some sunshine. A mostly fine picture across most of Northern Ireland too. Here there should be some sunny skies and 1 or 2 coastal showers. Temperatures rising to around 9 Celsius. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's